Hey there. Welcome to admissionsroadmap.com. My name is Ashwin. I'm the founder of Admissions Roadmap. Our mission here is to inspire you, the ambitious Indian, to get into top global business schools. We not only want you to get into those business schools, but also want you to succeed once you're in those business schools. And that's the reason for creating this video interview series. We break down what successful applicants did, successful Indian applicants did, and what they did to get into these schools, how they did research about these schools, and how they've succeeded once they've graduated from these schools. I hope you enjoyed this interview. In order to contact me or join the Facebook group, go to admissionsroadmap.com/MBA or contact me at ashwin@admissionsroadmap.com. I'll see you in the interview. So today's guest is Nitin Shastri. Nitin and I have known each other for a long time. One of my oldest friends. He went to Rice Jones School of Management. Did I say that correctly?
Jones School of Business.
Jones School of Business.
And in fact, it's been rebranded now to Rice Business, I feel.
Okay, Rice Business is what it is. It is most known for its oil and gas and energy competence. But Nitin is one of the few that has gotten into management consulting from there, is now a senior manager, or going to be hopefully a senior manager at Deloitte in their strategy and operations practice. Welcome, Nitin.
Thank you. Excited.
All right, man. Let's get started. So the objective, as we talked just off air, was to help Indians understand what they need to expect from the MBA application process, but also then what they need to do to succeed while they're at business school. Yeah. So why don't you just share a little bit about your background, where you're from, what your GMAT score was, and then we'll get started from there in a chronological order.
Sure. So I am originally from Bangalore. I did my undergrad in engineering at PESIT in Bangalore. And I worked for, I would say, a little about 3.5, 4 years before I started business school. My GMAT score was 710.
Okay. What were your motivations when you thought about pursuing an MBA? Why did that even come up? And I have an interesting story because we knew each other from way back then. But you were the trigger for why I applied to business school. Because I thought, man, my friends are applying to business school. Maybe I should try this GMAT thing. Right? So how did you come about, and how did that thought come about within you?
Yeah, the journey goes back, I think, to, I would say, the second year of college. So second year of engineering in PESIT. Like a lot of other people who grow up in India, I think my path was pretty set in terms of which undergrad I would pursue. It was either engineering or medicine. I didn't like biology, so it was naturally getting into engineering. But I would say around like the second year of engineering, a lot of my friend circle, they were thinking about going abroad to get their masters, especially going to the US to get their masters. And many of them were like preparing for GRE and whatnot. So like as with anything else, like being in the same social circle, I was like, oh, maybe I should give this a shot. And I took I just did a prep session with one of my friends on GRE, and I was like, well, like I'm not sure if I want to keep going on the same path of the technical route. And I think over time, taking some of the classes I was taking, I knew very quickly I did not want to be in that tactical operational engineering mode. I wanted to operate at a higher level, which is kind of what I do now, more in strategy. So it kind of, I would say it stemmed right then. And at the same time, like it also helped that, half of my friends were preparing for GRE. Half of them were thinking about mostly CAT, right, which is to study for the IIMs. So I'd say like my MBA mindset started like end of my second year, the beginning of my third year of engineering, when I actually did a lot of CAT prep. And I took the CAT. I believe it's still called CAT. I got close enough. I always got close, but never close enough. I was like never a 99 percentile. I think I got up to a 97 percentile. And that stemmed saying, I still want to get my MBA and now I want to go abroad.
It's fascinating. I've known you since, I don't know, we were 4 or 5. I did not know that you were preparing for your CAT until just now.
Yeah, I took it twice.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, that's great. So now back in engineering itself, you felt the need to move away from the technical sciences and the engineering studies, and you wanted to go into more of the higher level strategy at work. Tell me about the time when you started working. What were you working in, and what then confirmed your hypothesis that you wanted to go into to get an MBA?
Yeah, so I had a couple of job offers coming out of undergrad. I started working for it. I chose my options were either go to Infosys, like every other 165 people from PESIT, or there was a startup that I thought I would have a better opportunity both from a learning perspective as well as a growth perspective. So the company's name is Sonim. They were developing mobile voice over IP applications. Won't get into all the specifics. And then my undergrad major was also telecommunications, so it felt like a natural fit. So I chose to go into Sonim. And also I took up the offer purely because it was low risk. They were paying me a lot of money, and I knew I wanted to get an MBA, and I would quit within a year, maybe 2 years, depending on how long it would take. So that's kind of how, that's the company I chose to work for.
Okay.
And when I started working, I think like the initial few months were really good. When everything was new, I was with a new firm, I was around a new group of people. They were all treating me like an adult. I had a lot of ownership about in terms of the stuff I was working on, and it was like some pretty good leading edge technology. But I think what confirmed the hypothesis was I was around a bunch of other engineers. And then when we were getting into conversations, I could see how passionate they were about some of the software or the code they would write. And I would just be sitting there not caring enough about it. So it really showed that I didn't like it. While I was good at it, I wasn't very passionate about it. And like to me, like that's something very important in terms of like interest, something that piques my interest. So once the learning curve kind of slowed down, I was like, I need to move on.
Interestingly, an off-topic thought I had when you were saying that was it's the reason why people stick around in consulting until they hit partner versus those that where life catches up. Because I felt exactly the same. I used to ask a lot of partners why they were still in consulting after so many years of long hours and travel, and they said, "Oh, I'm just truly passionate about solving client problems." And I was like, "Oh, okay, maybe I'm quite not there yet." Anyways, it's a good sidebar. So, what did you know about the MBA application process when you began it? Let's say you gave your GMAT, you got a 710 score, and then you had to start applying. What did you truly know about it back then?
So I knew the application process when I first started out would be a combination of initially writing a bunch of essays, and the essays would require, to a degree, some level of introspection, because they ask you about, why so-and-so business school, why MBA, what are some of your unique experience, yada, yada, yada.
How did you learn about that? How did you learn that this was what was expected? Because when I started, I had no clue.
I don't know. Maybe it was conversations with friends. Maybe it was, well, one of my cousins got her, one of my cousins who was a few years older than me, she moved here for her MBA back in 2002, 2003. I don't remember when.
Okay.
Not that we spoke about it then, but when I started going through this journey of applying for business schools, I did talk to her. And obviously you go on the website, right? Once you've decided, once you've thought through the list of schools, and we'll get to the list of schools that you want to apply to, you go on the website, you look at the online application, and then they say these are the requirements for the application. Gotcha. So I kind of knew you had to write a bunch of essays. I knew that, once you get through the essays, there'd be like a shortlisting, and there'd be an interview process, and there'll be the final decision. So that's pretty much all I knew about the application process.
Okay. What did you then do next at that point? How did you select the list of schools? We don't need to go into the names of the schools, but talk to me about the application process during and what some of the challenges were that you had.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just reveal. So my journey was kind of spread over 2 years.
Okay.
It also was during a time when the financial crisis had just hit. So this was I started my application process in 2008 when I had just a little under 2 years of work experience, and the market had just exploded. So it was a time when there was a lot of people going into business school, because especially in the US, because they were out of jobs. So like in terms of the first year, well,
Mm-hmm.
my goal was always in India. It
Mm-hmm.
was IIM or bust, right? So I did
Mm-hmm.
not bother applying to any of the other tier two schools in India, just because to me it was either the top three IIMs or no other school in India, and I would go
Gotcha.
abroad.
Okay.
So when I started looking at schools abroad, I adopted a similar mentality, and I was like, and I went into the top 10 school. Like you go to the US, whatever the
News.com. Yeah.
the usnews.com. You look at the top 10 business schools, and I
Yeah.
went through each one, and I said I'll apply to each of these schools. So it was like it was all the big ones, right, that you can think of: Harvard,
Yeah.
Wharton, Kellogg, yada yada yada. So that's how, like, and I applied to those schools, but then to be but then like the schools also disclose like the average demographics when you actually look at them,
Yeah.
and like while applying I knew that I was really on the low end, and there's a lot of challenges.
Why? How did you figure that out? This would be useful
So
for
the
people
average
who are
age, I
applying
think,
for them to look at it.
so purely in terms of average experience and average age, I was 22, 23 when I was applying, and the average age of the schools was 28, 29. Work
Mm.
experience was probably over 5 years or 6 years. Even in fact, when I went to business school, I was the youngest in my class.
Mm.
Uh, but that said, I think there was age was a factor,
Mm.
right? Two, the second thing is, being male, Indian, IT,
Engineer.
even though I technically claim I'm not IT and I went to, like, my startup wasn't IT related, I would be put under that bucket.
Of course.
That is another very big challenge,
Yeah.
and it takes a lot to differentiate yourself, because the 710 isn't enough to differentiate yourself.
Yeah.
Even a 750 arguably is not good enough to differentiate yourself.
Yeah, there's a stat that I always used to tell my clients who used to go into this MBA process. Out of a class of 500 people at Ross in my year, there were about 30 Indians, of which about 60% were engineer/IT. When I see engineer, it doesn't matter if you're mechanical and working in oil and gas, I put you under one category. And then there was, most of them had there was an average GMAT score of 740.
Yeah.
I'm super competitive, and a lot of those engineers were from like the IITs, right? So of course, then you're at a significant disadvantage when there's this pool of people that are trying to apply, and you have to differentiate yourself. So the only
Yeah.
ways to do so is either by unique experience or actually writing super compelling essays, and that margin is
Exactly.
really thin to differentiate yourself.
Yeah, and that becomes very hard, right? Because like that differentiation becomes very personal, in the sense
Yeah.
it really depends on who is reviewing your essays
Exactly.
and whether they find that attractive or not. So long story short, that first year didn't get any admits. I got rejected from all the top schools. So the following year, I had another year of experience. I still was lacking like the average experience that people had. But I think
before you move on to the second attempt, let's talk about the mindset. What did you face when you got rejected? Because a lot of people are going to be rejected. Let's say in the 2017 applications, many students would have been rejected. Let's talk about the mindset and what made you tell, "Hey, I'm going to give this another shot," as opposed to just giving up.
no, I think like the honest answer was, I was like, as I said, right, age was the biggest like one of the biggest factors. I think like I don't think my life experience changed drastically between the first and the third year in terms of what I did. Like we can get into that, but I think the 1 year of experience made a big difference. What did work, I also feel, is I traveled internationally on work, and some of those work experiences matter. And I just feel I was a lot more mature in terms of like my work experience just showed a little more maturity, both in terms of what I could contribute in the class versus like the initial one, which was mostly a desk job.
Okay, I'll give
What
an
I think that made the difference.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'll give an advanced tip to people who were rejected in 2017, right? To parlay on this point. Yes, the additional year will add to your work experience, which will prove beneficial. There are two other things that one can do. If you feel that the GMAT is low, try and retake the GMAT, right? Try and see if you can increase the score. Anyway, it's the highest score that's going to be sent to the school, so it's okay. But more importantly, in that 1 year, definitely invest in building social capital. Take some extracurricular activities and actually actually do so in a manner that isn't trivial, but you make use of it in a leadership capacity. You can run
Yeah.
through everything locally in your organizations around you that are potential opportunities you can explore and actually drive change there, right? The worst thing is when people do it or write pretty trivial, oh, I donated blood in this year, blood donation camps, or I raised funding for a poor children's home. Everybody writes that. Do
Yeah.
something more and do something meaningful and show the track record of it, because that what you show and what you write about passionately will translate in the essays and will translate when people are reviewing it.
But that social one, like a little bit, completely agree, right? But like also a word of caution, like exactly to your point, that a lot of people like, say they did X, Y, Z, exactly to your point. It has to be impactful. It has to be
Exactly.
meaningful. And more
Exactly.
importantly, it should be something you value. Because if you
Exactly.
don't truly value something, you will never be able to speak very passionately about it. And
Yeah.
regardless of whether, and that will always show in your essay, and
Yeah.
that will always show in your interviews.
One of the examples I give is of a classmate of mine from business school. He was a track and field athlete in his undergrad. He was American, but the same thing can translate to India as well. And he used to train inner city kids in Detroit when he was working in Michigan in a school, in a particular school. He used to coach football, right? Now, even that for him was meaningful enough contribution, and he was able to translate it really well. So you can do anything
Yeah.
but translate it to passion and actually make a meaningful contribution. So that's one way to utilize the 1 year while you're trying to reapply. So for anybody out there. Okay, so great. So now you had a setback in the first year. What did you do the second year differently in order to get accepted into schools?
Yeah, so a couple of things I think I did differently. One, I was a little more like, so it was still like midway through the financial crisis, right? It didn't change for a long time. So like around 2009, I became a real more realistic, and I said, what true, like I actually also like I also spoke with spoke with my cousin and a few other people just to understand like what is the true value of the brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think like I became a little more realist. So there's a couple of things that work. One, I did not just apply to all the top schools. I also applied to a couple of other schools, and I think like what really helped was even before applications, some conversations with alumni
There you go.
about the schools and the programs, just to learn beyond the brand what is important.
There you go.
And like Rice is like probably the best example. I had no intention to like I did not know about Rice back in 2009. I don't think Rice had a great ranking. Today they're like close to the 20s,
Yeah.
but they didn't have a great ranking back then. But what worked was, and there's an incredible story where I think they got my GMAT score through
Okay.
GMAT, as did a lot of other schools that reached out to me. And they sent me a note saying one of their admissions directors would be in Bangalore
Okay.
for like the tours, the MBA fairs that they do.
Yep.
And they said they can arrange for a one-on-one meeting with him if I was interested in meeting him.
Gotcha.
So I said, like, absolutely, right? Like this was a like no regrets choice. I was like, absolutely, I'll go meet him. And then I talked to him, and when I talked to him is when I learned a lot about the program. I obviously did my research before going into the meeting, but like I think being able to like drill down into the specifics of the program, and also listening into some of the calls that all the MBA programs actually host about their school and the program and the process, etc. That gave me a lot of confidence about Rice. And then I applied, and like I very quickly got an admit, and then I also had like 3 or 4 other admits. But just the personal connection I'd already made by then was one of the biggest influences in my decision.
In the first year, I assume you did not talk to any of the alumni. Okay, it's huge mistake. Most people just look at the websites and just do an application assuming they'll stand out. It is insufficient. As you will talk from your experience of how people contact you now. Tell the story that you were telling me about the pet peeve you have about students who are applying to schools now, given your position as an alumni interviewer for Rice.
Yeah, so I like both as a first year and a second year B school student, and like even post, I've been doing business school interviews for a while. So like 2 things that really pisses me off about students who are applying. One, who are not very crystal clear about their own story and why they want to do an MBA. If you're not able to articulate that crisply and well, then I won't be able to follow your story.
Yeah.
Which is one, and that's like a little more of a skills thing, which I think needs to be honed and nuanced, right? But the other thing that really annoys me is people who ask me questions that can be found on the website. I would say 8 out of 10 students who actually when at the end of every interview, and Ashwin, you can talk to this as well. There'll be 5 or 10 minutes when you can ask, when we'll open it up for questions where you ask, we are looking for you to ask intriguing questions. And if I get random basic questions about, what's the class size? How diverse is it?
Can I participate in clubs? Oh, yes, yeah. Of course you can.
Whatever that may be, that doesn't you're actually not portraying the best of you, yeah. And that's a big thing. And if that's a big thing for me, then I'm sure it's a big thing for a lot of other admissions counselors as well.
So for most people who are applying, make sure you do a lot of research, and the minimum amount is at least talking to a few alumni and students from each school you're applying to, because that is absolutely critical to even get across a message that is different from anybody else who's reading just the website and saying, oh, this class and this class is why I want to attend this school. And believe me, most essays are like that.
Yeah, so, that's just nothing.
As you can see from your year 1 versus year 2, there was more customized research. Okay, so then back in the sequence of events, you applied. This time you got into Rice with other business schools. Rice gave you a pretty good scholarship from what I remember. You accepted Rice. You went into Rice. Let's talk about the year 1 and the year 2 journey, right? You and I know that you had certain personal challenges back home, which we don't need to talk about, but let's talk about the year 1 just in the business school itself. I asked you before this interview, were you overwhelmed? Because I was very overwhelmed the first 2 months. A lot of my classmates in the strategy class or in the finance class in the first module had to carry the weight of my underperformance, and I'll be very, very candid with it. They had to, because I was stressed as hell that recruiting had already begun, and I wasn't able to make up my mind as to what career choice I wanted to get into. Did you face any such issues? What was the first 90 days of your year 1 like?
So interesting, and I think that is a very, and I'll start with, I'm not surprised that you went through the journey, and I'm not surprised. So my journey, I would say I didn't feel overwhelmed, but there are times when I felt like there's a lot going on and it was difficult to manage, yes. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons you learn in business school is time management. Is where do you want to prioritize, what you want to prioritize. But I think Ashwin, to your point though, right? So Rice, for everyone listening, the class size, my class was a little over 100 students versus what Ashwin's referring to was close 500. To about 500 in a class.
Yep.
That makes a big difference, both in terms of personalized attention. Forget the attention that you get from the professors, just the personal relationships that you're able to build with your classmates is very different in a class of 100 or 150 versus 500.
Yeah.
Right. My cohort was split into into just 2 groups, right? Because we were 60, whatever, 110, and we pretty much knew. I pretty much knew everyone. I'd say there's a few things that worked in my favor. Mm-hmm. Which probably helped and probably helped me be a little focused. I'll not forget academics first. Mm-hmm. Just purely in terms of what I thought I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. All through my essays, and I kind of held true to this. I was very clear that I wanted to get into consulting, even in my first year. For me, so Rice had 3 options. I think you did this in the intro, right? Mm-hmm. So investment banking, there's a lot. Investment banking is pretty big at Rice. Mm-hmm. Consulting was kind of getting there. Mm-hmm. I would say it was it's not as good as it is today, but mm-hmm. It's when I started, there were a few there's a couple of consulting firms that were big, mm-hmm. and the big ones we talk about today, the McKinsey, BCGs, Bains, and Deloitte, did not recruit a whole lot. But I knew which company, I knew I wanted to get into consulting. And then mm-hmm. obviously, as with any other thing, you always have to think about a fallback. Mm-hmm. And Rice is a good finance program. So I was mm-hmm. whatever reason, if consulting doesn't work out, I'll like look for corporate finance. So I think that made my networking quite targeted when I first started, because I didn't think about networking with any of the corporate finance firms because I wasn't thinking about failure. I was only networking with consulting firms.
What was your memory of the first 90 days? What was the initial thing when you got onto Rice? How was the onboarding process like, and what did you ultimately think you had to focus on?
Yeah, so I think like in terms of onboarding, I think Rice did a really good job. Like even before, so usually the first 2 weeks are called immersion. We had a pre-immersion just for the international students. So there was a week of just, I don't even remember how many, like of the 110, there are like 25 or 30 of us who were international kids. So the school did a lot for us, just bringing us together, making us all feel comfy. Like we had happy hours, even like some of the logistical things, like getting our driver's license, etc. They kind of helped us take care of those things, which I thought is important. Immersion, I would say, like probably the first 3 days of immersion, or even the first week, maybe I'm lying. Like I don't remember like going back that far, but I do feel like the first week of immersion did feel a little swamped, right? And like they do it for a purpose. It's immersion because you're in school from 8 in the morning till like close to midnight, and then you have to turn on assignments and you start again at 8 in the morning.
Yeah.
Across different things. So I feel like that is the first, that I felt was very busy, and it was a lifestyle change because in India, like there was a few late nighters at work, but it was never on a consistent basis. I think that was the biggest, like I would say not just a mind shift, but like that took adjusting. And I'd say accounting, like I did struggle in my first, like I eventually got an A+ in accounting and I was a tutor in accounting, but like my first class or the first couple of days in accounting just completely flew over my head, right? So it took a little
unfamiliar subjects.
Yeah, like I had no clue, but like accounting is also just rules. But it took a little bit of reading up and things like that, which made, which I eventually caught up.
When did the focus on recruiting begin at schools? Because I think most people who are exactly. Most people underestimate how quickly recruiting begins when you join a school.
Yeah. I think it's week 2, if I'm not wrong. Maybe even like before.
Right
after immersion. So because it starts very early, because as soon as the second year start on campus, so right after immersion, the second year start on campus, banks come to recruit people, right? Right after the banks come, consulting firms come in. And then you have like the laggards of like the regular corporate companies that come in.
Actually, I had no idea that Rice was very good for investment banking. I assume it's because of the very strong oil and gas and energy coverage there.
Very focused on oil and gas banking. So Houston, like they only recruit for Houston. They don't recruit for New York, but all the big banks have an oil and gas unit in Houston that they recruit for.
Okay, so for anybody who's looking to get into investment banking, particularly focused on the oil and gas and energy sector, there's no place like Rice, right? It makes only logical sense.
Okay. And the culture is also very different from New York, from what I've heard. I have a lot of banking friends.
I assume. Wasn't Enron based in Houston? It was, right?
These are based in
Oh man, I just remembered that off the top of my head now. Okay, so let's talk about some of the challenges of recruiting from Rice, particularly for management consulting, and how did you manage to get into a consulting firm? Was it in the first year or was it in the second year?
Yeah, as with every other story, like it started with failure. So my first year, I was recruiting. So I'll start with, there were not a whole lot of consulting firms that were recruiting out of Rice in the first year. So EY used to recruit a few people. There was a small consulting firm called Calypso who was recruiting a few people. And then we had only then like slowly grown the base of alumni at McKinsey. So McKinsey came on like McKinsey did a short, like, like whatever. And they took a couple of interns. But the first in my so essentially this is your second semester, I did not get a consulting interview and I won't get into all the other details in the second year, but I didn't get a consulting interview in the US. What I did do was I did an internship at Wipro in India within that consulting service. So I did a consulting interview, but not the traditional manner. I
Got
just
it.
did it in India. But yeah, like just speaking, right? So, Ashwin, you can do the comparison, but I think at Rice, we were about 20 of us who were into 20, 25 who were interested in consulting.
Consulting.
There are about 7 to 10 internships. So like, and a lot, so like that meant like 15 of us didn't get didn't get any consulting internships. Anyway, so starting second year, and also like I don't think I did a great job because it was like a little bit of a cultural change in terms of networking and so on. I don't think I did enough to get my name in front of McKinsey. I don't think I did enough to get my name in front. I did enough to get my name in front of EY, but I didn't do enough to get my name in front of a lot of other companies. So as a result, didn't even get interviews with a lot of the companies.
What, having been on the other side with Deloitte, and we'll come to how you got into it in the second year. To make a point, when you said you don't think you did enough to get your name in front of them, what advice do you have for people who are recruiting right now, particularly in year one or year two? How would they get their name out there with these firms?
So generally, like all these companies will have like an initial social. Like your best starting point is always start with the alums. Probably start with the recently graduated alums. The recently graduated alums are because like I ran Rice recruiting for Deloitte for 5 years before I went for Australia. But the more senior you get, the less time you have to do different things, right? So I use the newly recently graduated kids because they already know the students on campus, at least the first years or second years, to get insights about like who would be good for us to even like talk to and interview, as well as like it's a fresh perspective, right? So and they're also more accessible. So I think starting point, start with the newly recently graduated alums of which business school. To to interact with them, talk about the experience, probably eventually you'll have to you probably have to prove your mettle, doing some cases with people to the point where they will like put in a word for you come recruiting time, right? So I think there's an evolution of coffee chats, talking about like your interests, to proving that you're good. Like one is like socially, like can I work with so and so? Great. That you have established the social credibility, let's establish the analytical credibility, and then you kind of go into the interview process, right? So it's like a multi-stage process, I feel.
I think another advanced tip for a lot of people is don't underestimate the power, especially when you're an MBA 1 or a first year, depending on how they call it in each school.
Yeah.
When you're an MBA 1, don't underestimate the power that MBA 2s have in terms of putting in a good word. I know my calls for McKinsey largely most of the time, both during my first year and my second year, were because of strong MBA 2 connections who were very favorable in my regard and said, hey, you should definitely interview him because I know he'll be good. So it does make a lot of difference to network with your MBA 2s. Don't make it trite. Make it meaningful and purposeful like you would any other connection even before you get into business school, right? It's the same thing you need to learn on how to build connections without making it transactional.
Exactly. I was going to say the same word. Like, don't make it transactional.
Exactly. Because that will translate throughout your career as well. Even once you're in consulting, the same thing, right? Once you stop making it transactional, everybody can see through it and they're going to avoid you. Right? Let's talk about year 2. You came back as again with your business school story. You started with failure and then you came back. You had a very, very small class size, people gunning for consulting. How did you get the consulting job at Deloitte?
Few of my classmates already had they had already done their internships. They got their job offers. So I'll start with McKinsey. So I'll start with McKinsey, and I'll probably pick McKinsey and Deloitte as the two big stories. I did a bunch of other things with other consulting firms. I did interviews. Eventually, I just said I'm not interested. It was between one of the two companies, right? So as you're saying, a couple of my classmates who are technically year 2s, they had interned at McKinsey. So I was talking to them, and they obviously knew I was very interested. So, and we were all out, it's a colleague, we talk about
very tight-knit. Yeah.
We were very tight-knit, close friends. So they helped a lot. They helped a lot in terms of giving me cases and prepping me and putting in a good word with the people, with the actual recruiters for McKinsey. And that kind of got me my McKinsey interviews. Deloitte was a somewhat of a different story. They had not been on campus for like 4 or 5 years. That was the first year they chose to come on campus. But even there, I did something similar. We had an executive program. So it's not just the second years, Ashwin. There's the executive or the evening professional program, most of whom are working in one of these firms.
Already? Yeah.
So you want to like it's
That's a great tip.
the same story applies. So again, like I was taking a few classes and I realized these guys were working with Deloitte. So I again struck a really good relationship with them. And then I think the career center is also quite influential.
Okay.
So I hit Deloitte with multiple angles, right? So I went with the second years. I asked for contacts for within the firm, and like I was networking with them, doing coffee chats and interviews and so on. And like I was speaking with the career center who had relationships with the recruiters to to push my case in some shape or form. So I think all those meant I got like interviews with both, like, and also Deloitte, like we do a on-campus info session like everyone does. And then they did like based on on-campus info session and all the pre-work I'd done, they shortlisted a few of us for a case workshop. And that was like a group of 10 people. And then I was in the group of 10, and then like in the group of 10, again, I was able to really clearly demonstrate how advanced I was. I was really good in cases, right? So like all the soft skills are important, and you can only do like so much with networking.
But ultimately, you need to be good in cases.
You have to crack cases. I was probably like the top 1 or 2 at Rice at that time in terms of cracking cases. So I was doing really well on cases anyway, and I was very confident just because I'd done so many cases. To the point where, like I went to the case workshop. They were all like, "Oh, this is great," and then I got interviews, and then one thing led to another, and I got an offer.
Let's talk about the program. Besides, the reason I focus a lot on just the recruiting piece, because that is ever consuming. There is academics, there is social, that's always there in a business school. There are clubs, there are leadership opportunities. But recruiting is this thread that just continues all the way through, consistently for the 2 years. But let's talk about the other aspects of the program. Talk to me about what you liked about the Rice program, and talk to me about what the culture is of the Rice MBA with examples so that other people can understand when they're applying to Rice what it translates to in terms of culture.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing to start with, it probably comes top down, right? So the associate dean of the program was an ex-alumni, and he is like this he is awesome. He's an awesome orator, but he's also this like really cool, chill, laid back guy to hang out with. So that kind of has trickled down. Like given the leadership is that way, it's kind of trickled down to not like forget like the professors. Some of them are weird, some of them are not. But like a lot of the admissions program and so on, they're all like really, really helpful. Everyone is always there to like listen to you and help you in any shape or form. On the administrative side, right? I think on the from a student perspective, like as I said, I think the biggest difference to start with was the size of the program. 110 people meant like I knew everyone. Like, did I get along with everyone? No, but like, did I get along with most people? Yeah, like you're never going to get along with everyone. But like I like most of the people, and then like some of them were really, really good friends. And then, so that becomes like a group of friend circle that you're hanging out with all the time. Now, at the same time, that translates to like, I know we didn't want to talk about recruiting, but comes back to recruiting as well, right? So doing consulting means you need to do a lot of case prep. Doing case prep means you need case partners. And you can't just do with one case partner. You need like more than one, just because you don't want to get used and accustomed to one style. So the fact that we were like 20, 25 of us meant we all were just like, we all worked together. And in general, we were happy for each other when someone got an offer versus saying, oh, this.
Even if you were competing for the same offer, right? Or for the same role.
We were always helping each other. Even the night before the interviews, we were helping each other. And I think that made a big, big difference. The fact that like we genuinely cared for one another's success.
What's unique about the Rice experience, besides it being a small or tight-knit class, compared to other people that you know who've gone to business schools in other places? especially once you've gone into consulting in Deloitte, you would have had colleagues from other schools. How do you feel it's different, if at all you can make out the difference?
So, like, I mean, I went, like, I don't want to name the school, but like
You
one of my
shouldn't.
buddies
Yeah.
at Lloyd, especially, went to like, one of the top tier schools. And like when we were talking about the experience, he said he absolutely hated the experience.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
but not because of anything else other than the fact that he did not like the people he was around.
I think I know who this is, but we won't mention any names.
I don't think you know him.
Oh, damn.
This,
Okay.
yeah,
But we'll
you
talk
don't.
offline about this.
Yeah, I
But
don't
okay,
think you
so
know him. I really don't. Anyway,
was
but
it a
like he
big
didn't
class
like it
size?
purely because, hey,
Was it a big
he
class
said it was
size?
like the type of people, like both the class size and the type of people who were in the class. Um, versus like, and I think like we talk about culture, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it trickles down. The people who show up on campus
Mm-hmm.
show up for a reason because the people who are interviewing them are looking for certain styles, right? Like we
Mm.
all are like, I mean, I'll say we are all type A's and like whatever else, but there's a distinction. I feel there's arrogant versus like being nice and like easy to get along with, and
Mm.
we look for those traits. We're all 110 like that, no, but like well, majority of them
Majority
were
of them.
like, yes, absolutely. I think
Okay.
that's the biggest distinction.
Understood. Okay.
And I'm
That
not
makes it.
saying Rice is the only school like that. I'm sure like there's plenty of other schools who are also very similar.
I can vouch for it. Another client of mine who went to Queens in Canada, very, very, very small class size. In fact, when I was visiting him in Toronto recently, he was talking to me about how important that was for recruiting. Right? You can only reach out, say, 2 years in, or even when you're graduating, and if say you don't have a job, if you know everybody personally, they will
Yeah.
make a phone call for you on your behalf to another person that they know to say, hey, can you make sure to get this guy? As opposed to in larger schools where you just say, hey, I'm also from the same school as you. Do you mind, putting me through? Which often doesn't yield a very good connection.
Yeah.
I think the class sizes, the small class sizes are often underrated. There are
Mhm.
benefits to larger class sizes, especially, say, for instance, from Ross, and
Yeah.
the alumni network is
Sometimes
massive and
that's
everywhere. Exactly. There are benefits to both, but one shouldn't underestimate how good a small class size, what benefits it yields.
Mhm.
Okay. So great. You graduated, got into Deloitte. We understand a little more about the culture. Let's talk about overall, if you were to repeat the entire experience, would you do it? And if so, what would you change about it?
Ooh, tough one. Would
Mm.
I do it? Like, absolutely. And I think we didn't touch upon this, right? But in terms of MBA, I think when I talk about people's story, people need to be very crystal clear about why they want to get an MBA. My story was very clear. I wanted to change from like a technical role to a strategic role. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like to boil it into like three words.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like so as a result, like both academically, socially, and a lot of other way, I feel like I got a lot out of the MBA program.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I would absolutely go down the same journey again if I were to go back and rewind a few years back and reapply. Would I change the mix of schools I apply to, like having gone through and like having the benefit of hindsight? No, I'm actually very happy with the list of schools I applied to and like where I eventually landed. I'm very happy with that as well. Um, what is the other question? Sorry, I forgot.
Let me ask the second question a little differently. Were you to join the same program again, what would you do differently after you've gotten admitted, or what would you prepare for much in advance in order to succeed even better? I mean, it's hard to say in your case because you've already gotten a job, but is there something you'll give in terms of advice for people who have either gotten their admissions and are waiting to enroll into the school, to say, hey, here's what you can do to get a leg up, fellow
Yeah,
Indians, to
I think
to
the
to
only thing.
succeed?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would probably change is my second year when I was a little hung up about getting a major, and I got a finance major, a finance and a global business or whatever, like strategy major. Um, and like getting majors in general means you'll have to take classes, some of which are good and some of which are bad. I
Hmm.
think one of the biggest things I would change is to not get stuck to majors or any kind of these brandy thingies.
Mm-hmm.
Do what you feel will like help you upskill
Mm-hmm.
what you currently have, and do some things that you feel are either important or that you have like that you're passionate about, right? Like
Mm.
I took Spanish classes, like for like even though like I dropped out after a while, but like that's because I had more time.
Mm.
I didn't know what to do with all the free time I had after I got my job offer. But like regardless, not diluting the fact, I think that's one of the things that I would probably change is just taking classes
Mm-hmm.
that I would have gotten more value or that I was really interested in versus just getting a check mark on a major. And I think the same thing applies to other people as well. Is like two things. It gets very easy as soon as you start into business school to get. So one is do what you like, and more importantly, especially Indians, right? And like we in general have been brought up with the mentality of competitiveness. So
Mm-hmm.
we're always looking to like get the highest grade,
Highest grades, be
get
first in
whatever it
class,
is,
get the best
drop it.
job. Yeah.
I was fortunate to not get into that mindset because when I went into my program, I said no more of this stuff, and that really helped. But I think that makes a big difference. Not like grades are important, don't get me wrong, but not focusing on grades, but focusing on learning will take that pressure off of you to an extent. Likewise, grades is one, the recruiting rat race is another one, especially as you get into like it's regardless of big or small programs, probably more amplified in a bigger program. Recruiting is kind of nerve wracking, right?
It
But the
is.
fact that you've decided to take 2 years out to study and like get a business degree means you have made a conscious choice to an extent. And like the moment you get back on campus, if people are worried about finding a job, then that defeats the purpose of the whole business school experience.
Guilty.
Which and trust me, don't get me wrong, everyone I think feels that, and everyone is kind of pushed into that rabbit hole. Like and the career center kind of like it's their job to get you in that zone, but not letting that affect you I think becomes very important, right? So doing everything you can to find the right balance is very important.
I've seen classmates of mine. I couldn't agree with you more. By the way, I've seen classmates of mine who had this ability to just switch off the worry, even at the cost of not getting a job or during the stress of interviews. I certainly wasn't one of them. You know me personally, so you know what kind of a person I am. I'm always trying to figure out how to figure things out. Um, and I think that's the entire reason for why we're doing this interview series, so people can see what to expect and people can perhaps calibrate against their own behavior and say, okay, this is what I need to do in order to succeed, or I shouldn't stress out. I should expect this. And I hope this people find it useful. Is there anything you'd like to cover as we close this interview?
Well, just one thing I was going to add is don't underestimate the importance of networking. I think naturally in India, we are all like, I don't think we are brought up in that, like the ease with which, you'll find some of the people who've grown up here in the West, like
Yeah,
network, and it comes as second nature to them.
yeah,
To me, and Ashwin, I'm sure to you as well, it was like an acquired skill, right? It took
yeah,
lots of practice to eventually get there.
yeah,
And it's not easy.
yeah.
So, like, the reason I'm bringing that up is regardless whether it's recruiting for a job or recruiting for business school, that becomes a very important skill. And
Yeah,
finding ways to make connections with people and having
is
conversations
extremely
with people
important.
is important. So, like, give it time and like give it practice. Like, don't get disheartened if something doesn't work the first couple of times. It's an acquired skill and it'll take time.
There is in the first interview with Siddharth Arora, who's in UCLA, when I worked with him on his applications, I taught him exactly how to make networking more natural, because it is
Yeah.
unnatural for us Indians. And there are ways and hacks you can do it. Um, Autistic kids, typically who are on the spectrum, they don't know how to deal with social situations. But if they're put into programs for social rehabilitation very early on, they learn how to work around cues in order to make people believe that they're comfortable in it. But basically, it's them making. And the same thing with networking that one should apply. And this is what I help these people, because
Very interesting.
it is difficult, but we need to make it happen, because it's a skill that you will grow into over time, and then your own behavior will then come in, and then it'll become a natural part of your life several years in.
And you'll need it all through your life, right? Like
Exactly.
networking is second nature to me these days, and like without it, I don't think I'd be as not like I'd be anywhere I am today.
That's right. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, man. I think we covered a lot. Hopefully, this is useful for everybody that's listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Awesome.